power gap between spellcasters and martials is a huge problem. But what do you do with it? For those of you who don't know, I've actually made a video about this previously, and it was one that I made a while ago. It's not very good, but recently it seems to have picked up in the algorithm, and a lot of people asked if this was still my opinion, and the answer is no. There's so much that goes into the difference between spellcasters and martials, and frankly, I'm just not a mechanics channel. I'm a roleplay and storytelling channel, and so I'm going to talk about the roleplay and the storytelling, but it will go into mechanics some because frankly, it's necessary. But before I go into that, what makes this such a hard thing to take care of in the first place? What creates the disparity of power between spellcasters and martials? Really what it comes down to is versatility. Spellcasters have the ability to learn so many spells, and those spells can just do way more than martials. Martials just typically don't get much except something that allows them to fight better. Meanwhile, spellcasters get things which allow them to teleport around, manipulate reality, control the very earth around them. It's really hard to argue that that stuff is not just, well, more cool than a lot of the stuff the martials can do. At least on surface level. Beyond that, a lot of spells also just give you the ability to take people out of combat, and martials don't have that ability. They have to hit something until it's dead. Meanwhile, you have a spellcaster dominating people or casting a hypnotic pattern. That's just not something a martial can contend with. And so it makes it extraordinarily difficult to make the martials in your party feel on par with the spellcasters. Now at early levels, it's actually not that difficult. Spellcasters don't have a ton of spells to be able to use, and they don't have a lot of spell slots in the first place. They have to be very careful, and a lot of the times, you could just die in one hit as a spellcaster. You don't have a whole lot of health.
What is a king to a god?
And what is a god to a non-believer?
And honestly, if you were to split the two into pros and cons, that's pretty much what you would come up with. Spellcasters are a lot more versatile, but they have lower health and are easier to hit. Meanwhile, the martials are more consistent and they have a lot more hit points, but they don't really have options. And there's a lot of arguments you could make on why this really is the case and why martials and spellcasters don't work, yada, yada, yada. But you know what happens whenever you try and engage in that conversation? You have a lot of people showing up in the comments discussing the fact that it's not about the spellcasters or the martials, it's about how the game is run. And you know what? I think that is exactly correct and where most people go wrong on this. See, the more that I thought about it, I realized the truth is it's just how the DM handles combat. Because truthfully, this is about combat. In roleplay, spellcasters and martials can be on the same level. Yes, spellcasters do tend to have some manipulation spells, stuff like that, but frankly, that's not a huge deal. What it comes down to is just talking with people and roleplaying and having fun telling that story. And then there's exploration. Martials can pretty much explore just as much as spellcasters. Again, there are spells that spellcasters can cast, such as detect magic, detect traps, because that's such a great spell. But the point is, honestly, it's not that big a deal. They can stay on the same level, and I really don't find a lot of martials complaining if somebody casts detect magic and solves the environmental clues so that they can get to the next fight. Let's be honest, if you're playing a martial, more than likely you just want to fight, and that's okay. It's not the same for all of them, but every time I've picked a martial, it's because I want to be able to show off my combat chops. That's just the truth. I have roleplay things in the back of my mind I want to do, and I get to do them, but I also just really like fighting. So yeah, it's combat. Combat is what makes the martials feel less powerful than the spellcasters as time goes on. As you start to hit mid-levels, it just doesn't matter anymore. The spellcasters can wipe out an entire group with Fireball, take out an entire boss with Dominate Monster, and so the only thing that the Dungeon Master can really do to kind of nerf the spellcasters and make the martials feel on par is to give them higher and higher saving throw bonuses, which just makes it feel unfair to the casters. I mean, now the casters can't do anything because none of their spells go through, and there are a lot of Saber Suck spells out there. So what do? How do you handle this huge issue that can really lead to a lot of people not enjoying playing high-level play or even mid-level play? Well, the truth is, it's just how you choose to handle it, and you have to be a good storyteller. See, what I mean by this is you have to be able to look at the world around you and understand how it would work. If you're living in a world with magic, let's be honest, people know how magic works. People are going to be aware of that fact. It is a mechanical fact that almost all spellcasters will have pretty low dexterity, strength, and constitution scores. Not all of them, but most of them. Why is that? Well, because the mechanics require you to put your abilities into certain slots. Strength, dexterity, charisma, etc., etc. So you have to do that. Now, in a storytelling sense, this means that most spellcasters have to focus so much on this, they don't have time to train their bodies. And so they'll be easier to hit. So the monsters are going to try and hit them. Don't forget, the spellcaster's greatest weakness is concentration checks. Because that is something a lot of people forget about. Concentration checks are one of the largest ways of balancing out spellcasters. Yes, they can cast really powerful spells that can do over and over and over great things, but if they lose concentration, that's not good. They have now taken damage, and mind you, they will generally have a smaller health pool, and they've dropped concentration, and now there's somebody right on top of them that's going to make it incredibly hard for them to hold concentration without running away first. That's a big deal. The thing is is that a lot of DMs will not focus on the spellcasters because it feels cheap. But if you're being a good storyteller, looking at the world and treating it as real, then yes, the monsters and the enemies are going to go after the spellcasters if they have the intelligence to do so. Not only this then gives the marshals their core mechanic and ability to interact in combat. It is now their job to prevent the spellcasters from getting hit, almost as a support class. Now, I get it. This is easier said than done, because if you have a bunch of goblins running past the marshal has one opportunity attack, and unless he has sentry, yeah, he's not gonna actually be able to prevent them from going by. They're all just gonna run past, right? Well, yes, but also no. Again, you have to treat your enemies as real. You have to understand their motivations. If I'm in a combat encounter and I see this big old guy with a sword, yeah, sure, I could run past him and go hit the person behind him, but you know what I've just done? I've put myself behind enemy lines. And nobody with a sense of self-preservation is going to do that. Honestly, if you are looking at it that way, you're not gonna have all the goblins just rush by knowing that they're going to die, but hey, at least they'll get the wizard to drop that concentration. No, they're gonna wanna survive. Everybody usually has a desire to live. So if you treat them real, this isn't going to be so much of an issue anymore. And so this allows the spellcasters to feel like they have an important role. They're supposed to cast the big spells, do the big things, do the important stuff, and the marshals are supposed to hold the front line, which actually is exactly how combat used to go. You'd have the front line holding things down while artillery was in the back. It all makes sense. Now, it's not going to work this way for every combat encounter, but holding in your mind to treat the enemy as real will actually solve a lot of the disparity, because the marshals then have a very important goal: protect the spellcasters by being that wall in front of them, by being a danger, because they will hit over and over again with their martial abilities. They have the ability to be consistent every single round with that damage, and no one's gonna wanna have to touch that. It's interesting because in older editions of D&D, most of the actual balance around this was just treating the spellcasters as somebody that you played when you wanted to take a risk. Spellcasters could die, and dying characters were actually a lot more common in the oldest editions of D&D. The understanding was that spellcasters could die more easily, but if they got high enough level, they'd be a lot stronger. And so you played them with the hopes of getting to the higher level. And so you just played the game as a war game, and that made sense. But as D&D has become more and more story focused, the solution to this actual divide is being more story focused. It's adapting with what the game is intended to do and what your players want to play. Now, this doesn't work for every single game, it doesn't work for everybody, and I get that. Sometimes you just want to play a war game, and that's fine, in which case you're going to have to find your own solutions. A lot of people homebrew things, and I think that's fine, but not all of us are game designers, and we can screw up the balance more if we try to homebrew. But if you treat the enemy as real, actual foes, I think it actually does a great job of solving the issue between all this and making the marshals feel important, the spellcasters feel important, and it encourages them to actually think through their strategy. And eventually the marshals may develop their own unique abilities in the types of combos they try to do with the spellcasters. So make sure that everybody in your party has a reason to be in combat, and you'll solve a lot of those issues. A huge thank you to the YouTube members, without which this video wouldn't have been possible. An extra special shout out to BKBW, Corey Wood, Big D the Cool Guy, Ace Pizza Guy 22, Stormsaw, Emily Mares, and Agile Monk for subscribing at the Role Slayer tier.